present in Kumasi, Ghana. And with me is Miss Mercy Gifty Ansa, who is with Accra Technical University, an assistant librarian, and she would steer us throughout the question and answer session, and she would also play an intermittent role throughout this webinar. Without much ado, I would go ahead to introduce the theme for our webinar, the panel discussion this afternoon. As you all know, it is an important period in our history as a country. Ghana has just changed hands in political administration. We now have a new government. So it is important that we look back to where we are heading to as a country. So this webinar is looking at the theme, preserving Ghana's cultural heritage. We know that Ghana is a nation rich in history, traditions, and cultural diversity. And from our vibrant festivals and indigenous languages to our traditional crafts, music, and oral literature, our heritage is a vital part of our national identity. However, as we embrace modernization and globalization, many aspects of our cultural heritage face the risk of being eroded, forgotten, or replaced by external influences. Today, we seek to explore the significance of cultural preservation, the challenges we face, and the strategies that we need to safeguard our traditions for future generations. Our distinguished panelists will share their insights on how we can integrate heritage conservation into education, policy, and technology, while ensuring community involvement and sustainable development. With this background, we would delve into the discussion. And before that, I would like to appreciate a number of institutions that have made this webinar possible. First of all is the Accra Technical University, where we have a hardworking Dr. Florence Ploke as the university librarian who put together this webinar. And then also the Association of African Universities, which has been a great platform for libraries and educational institutions across the continent for us to foster unity and also to keep our goals going. Then we also have the Ghana Library Association, the Ashanti Regional Chapter especially, for also giving this webinar the needed publicity and attention to ensure that we get all of us on board the preservation agenda. We need to preserve our culture. Without much ado, I would also take the opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker. I'll call him so. He is the acting vice chancellor of the Accra Technical University. He is a distinguished electrical and energy systems engineer, actually a professor of electrical and energy systems engineering. He's a president of the IEC National Committee of Ghana, a fellow of the IET Ghana, and senior member of IEEE, that is the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineering. He holds a PhD in Energy Systems Engineering and has extensive experience supervising MSc and PhD research across Africa. His research focuses on hybrid energy systems, smart grids, and microgrid optimization with over 130 publications and numerous awards. Under his leadership, ATU has achieved remarkable milestones, including recognition as Ghana's top technical university. He also plays key roles in African and international standardization roles. Ladies and gentlemen, let's all welcome Professor Amevi Akupavi, who would deliver our keynote address as we lift the lid on this webinar. So please, Prof.
Ladies and gentlemen, and thank you once again for the opportunity to speak to you at this solemn occasion. Distinguished guests, faculties and staff, esteemed panelists, and the student and participant, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you today to the 17th edition of our ATU Library webinar series, an insightful platform where we engage in intellectual discourse on issues of national and global significance. Today's theme, that's preserving Ghana's cultural heritage, is both timely and essential in my view, especially as we approach the 68th anniversary of our independence, a reminder of our journey as a nation and the cultural richness that defines us as people. This occasion makes me reflect over a few things. Ghana's indigenous cultural heritage is gradually fading due to modernization, globalization, and shift in societal values. Our local languages, traditional cuisines, indigenous craftsmanship, music, folklore, and even time-honored festivals are at risk of being lost if deliberate efforts are not made to preserve and promote them. It is therefore commendable that this platform is shedding light on this crucial matter, bringing together thought leaders, researchers, and stakeholders to discuss strategies for safeguarding Ghana's unique identity. I take delight in the CTFM Heritage Caravan. Recently, innovative programs such as the CTFM Heritage Caravans and even other cultural tourism initiatives that I might not know have proven to be very successful in rekindling, interest in Ghana's rich traditions. However, beyond such efforts, institutions of higher learning, including, for instance, our dear institution, Accra Technical University, have a key role to play in documenting, in digitizing, and promoting Ghana's cultural asset for future generations. Through education, research, and technology, we can integrate heritage preservation into our academic curricula and national policies to ensure that our history, our values, and traditions continue to shape our collective future. I am confident that today's discussion will yield meaningful insights and actionable recommendations. Let us all commit to being custodians of our cultural heritage and work together to uphold the essence of our identity. We cannot leave behind our languages, leave behind our values, no, because of modernization only. Once again, I warmly welcome you all to this enriching session, and I encourage active participation, and I look forward to the impactful contributions that we made from this engagement and how this will reshape our experience as Ghanaians. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very successful deliberation. Thank you. May God bless you all.
All the medical knowledge and start learning about the water sector. We have to learn about the water sector, the water treatment plant, the engineering.
We are grateful. Thank you so much, Professor, the acting Vice Chancellor of the Accra Technical University, for this very insightful keynote address. We are so grateful. I'm sure a lot of food for thought has been provided, and we will definitely these wonderful words as we go ahead on this discussion. would also like to take the singular and introduce distinguished speakers. The first on the list, which Dr. Christopher Prom, or Chris Shorts, Urbana-Champaign, where he previously as Associate Dean for Digital and as Assistant Archivist. He holds a PhD in History from the University of Ireland. He served as Publications Editor and Chair of the Publications.
Okay. Urbana-Champaign.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, apologies. I think there was a break in the transmission. So Dr. Prom also served as Publications Editor and Chair of the Publications Board, and is also a Fellow of the Society of American Archivists. Currently, Chris is one of the project leads for a grant-funded project titled Catalyzing African Community Archives for Social Good, which he will tell us more during this panel. Our second presenter, and not the least at all, is Dr. Margaret Sraku-Lartey, who is a Ghanaian information and knowledge management specialist with over 30 years of experience in the field. She's a retired principal librarian at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, that is a Forestry Research Institute of Ghana. She holds a PhD in Geography and Rural Development. She has a profound interest in library automation, institutional repositories, and she also is an expert in indigenous knowledge systems. She is committed to unearthing local indigenous knowledge and integrating it into the information ecosystem to foster community development. Her work emphasizes the need for clear guidelines in managing indigenous knowledge, aiming to establish standard protocols through collaboration among librarians, publishers, researchers, and policymakers. Throughout her career, Dr. Sraku-Lartey has led various information management projects funded by international organizations, including the Elsevier Foundation, the UK Development for International Development, the International Institute for Communication and Development, and the International Union for Forestry Research Organizations. She has attended several conferences, both locally and internationally. She also teaches currently at the Scientific Communication and Oral Presentation Techniques for graduate students at the CSIR College of Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana. She has to her credit over 50 journal articles, conference papers, handbooks, and technical reports to her name. In recognition of her expertise, Dr. Sraku-Lartey was invited as one of the keynote speakers at the NISO Plus 2021 conference, where she discussed the significance of indigenous knowledge in the modern world. We hope to benefit a lot from our distinguished speakers this afternoon. But before then, let us take the opportunity to also recognize other notable personalities who are with us this afternoon. As time goes on, we would come in. So, Mercy, I would invite you to give us a short roll call of some of the people that are with us.
Okay, so please let me take it. I think we have a number of people with us, and let me just acknowledge some. I may not be able to acknowledge by name, but I know we have people from Nigeria. I think people from Illinois, Kenya, and people from Ghana, both CSIR, other university, Ghana Library Association. As we go along, I'll be mentioning some names. Thank you very much, Grace.
Thank you. Thank you, Doc. So you are all duly acknowledged. At this moment, I would like to take the opportunity to first invite Dr. Margaret Sraku-Lartey to, I would say, take the podium, the digital podium, and give her presentation to this house. Doc, you're on the platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my slides. May I ask if you can see the slides?
Sure, I can see.
And it's okay, thank you very much. And I hope my sound is okay too.
It is, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning for all our colleagues joining us from around the world. I can't see my slides now. What happened to it? Need to my slides.
The slide is visible here.
I'll stop sharing and start again because I can't see it on my laptop, even though it's on yours. What has happened?
Okay, Doc. Yeah, we are behind you, so I'm sure.
Okay.
You should find it. Yeah.
I'll find it.
Yeah, you will.
Okay, now is there? Is it there? Can you see it now?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yes,
You can see there.
Okay, great. So good. So I'll just start again. Good afternoon. Good evening.
Good afternoon in Ghana. Yeah.
Yes, in Ghana. And good morning for those in the morning time zone. As has already been said, we are going to look at preserving Ghana's cultural heritage this afternoon. And my topic is preserving indigenous knowledge, the critical role of libraries, archives, and museums. My name is Margaret Sraku-Lartey, as has already been said. I used to be a principal librarian at CSIR Forestry Research Institute, currently a lecturer at the same college, and a scientist. So I bring you greetings from Kumasi, and thank you all for joining this webinar. I also thank the organizers, ATU, and all the affiliates for doing me this great honor by inviting me to be one of the speakers for this webinar series. Preserving Ghana's cultural heritage, The theme of the webinar is more than apt for this month of March. And this month of March is our Cultural Heritage Month as a country. I'll go through this cultural heritage, indigenous knowledge, and all that. That will be the outline. So the month of March is observed as Ghana's Cultural Heritage Month. It is a month committed to the promotion and dedication of everything Ghanaian, and that is from food, from clothing, artifacts, I'll say festivals, plants, you name them. It's everything Ghanaian. It is a month when we celebrate our heroes and ancestors, and we reminisce on our past, what we call the good old days. We recall the things we did as children, and we recall what today we think were the good times. So I believe that there is no better time than this to begin a conversation on preserving our past so that it can help shape the future. The heritage we celebrate this month dates back many generations and focuses on cultural diversity made up of our tangible and intangible heritage. Our tangible cultural heritage include the monuments and castles, the forts, the artifacts and collections of objects and fabrics. For example, kente is a trademark. You will see anybody wearing kente and you know that the person is from Ghana or has been to Ghana or has received a gift from Ghana. But while the intangible also includes traditions and living expressions that we inherited from our ancestors and passed on to our descendants. This includes the indigenous knowledge systems such as oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, rituals, festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, and the knowledge and skills available to produce traditional crafts. So we take a look at it. The first one is the Larabanga Mosque in the northern region. And I keep on wondering whether as a nation we know the history. Maybe the history is known, but the local knowledge that initiated this mosque, I wonder whether anybody knows. And I wonder whether anybody is picking this up from the cultural people. We have festivals, and all of them have traditions behind them. But are they in the public domain? Is it available for us to go back to recognize? We have foods, our distinct foods, and their foods have now gone international. You name the jollof, the watches, the banku and tilapia, and it's basically international. But there are also other foods that have disappeared from the menus. You talk about the yaka, you talk about the epiti, and you talk about some foods that we used to eat as children, which are no longer in existence. Then look at our fabrics. We used to have fabrics that had names. So you had a fabric and it's called Ahrepankasa, or it's called Ahrepo. But now, who knows about these things? So these are the things we are talking about. So this talk will concentrate on our indigenous knowledge, or the knowledge or treasures of knowledge that are stored in the minds of our elders, and which has not been documented. It will share some insight into the complexities of this knowledge system and discuss why it is important to document indigenous knowledge for posterity. So what is indigenous knowledge? If I mention indigenous knowledge, what do you really understand by it? It can be described as the rich body of knowledge that is unique to a given people or community that is differentiated from modern scientific knowledge. It resides in the mind of the information holder and is transferred orally from person to person and spans several generations. So some knowledge might have developed many, many years ago, but because it's transferred from person to person, it's still there, even though along the line, some changes may have occurred. So it becomes a dynamic system of knowledge transfer. It tends to be collectively owned and takes the form of technologies, know-how, skills, stories, and we can go back to our Nancy stories. We talk of morale, the impact of honesty, and all those things that instill some form of or shaped us into the human beings that we are today. Then we have the food, the proverbs, our cultural values, our beliefs, community laws, which seem to work at some point in time because there was a law within the community, within the village that said you could not go to the riverside on a certain day. Not because there were monsters in the forest or at the riverside, but because they wanted the land to rejuvenate, to rest. But where are these communities' laws? If those laws were working, we wouldn't have people going into our forest reserves to go and mine gold at the expense of the treasures that we have in the forest. So, and it includes agricultural practices as well, including development of plant species and animal breeds that enable a community to achieve a stable livelihood, to enable the community to thrive. Most communities used to depend on the land on which they worked, and that is where they picked up the knowledge. So indigenous knowledge is the basic component of any country's knowledge system. It forms the basis for local level decision making. So at the local level, the chief or the elder will give an order based on the circumstances at the time, and it was adhered to. The value and importance of indigenous knowledge for development, therefore, cannot be overemphasized. No country can develop fully by ignoring its past. But today, we risk losing these extraordinary archives of knowledge and expertise, which are stored in the memories of elders, in the heads of healers, midwives, farmers, fishermen, and hunters in the different cultures of the world. So leaving humanity inevitably in danger of losing its past and perhaps jeopardizing its future as well. Indigenous knowledge is not rooted in a particular point in history, but has been developed, been adapted, and grown over time. It is not static, it is dynamic. It is, however, on the decline worldwide. This is especially so when an elder dies. He takes all the knowledge along. And this was illustrated perfectly by Hampati Bar when he stood before UNESCO in 1962 and said that in Africa, when an old man dies, it is a library burden to the ground. What does this proverb mean, and what are the implications for information management? The old man or woman in this case is the custodian of knowledge who stores volumes of wisdom and knowledge accumulated over many years. He or she has a lot to teach us about our very lives and the environment we depend on through the application of years of accumulated knowledge. With his or her death, all the knowledge he has accumulated goes with him. Nobody can benefit from the lost knowledge. So traditional indigenous knowledge is of a practical nature, especially in fields like agriculture, fisheries, health, horticulture, and forestry. This knowledge is valuable not only to those who depend on it for their sustenance, but is also important to modern industry and agriculture as well. Many widely used products, such as plant-based medicines and cosmetics, are derived from traditional knowledge. And I was in Japan, and most of the cosmetic shelves were filled with shea butter, creams, oils, and whatnot. But what are we using it for here? It's still in its raw form in Ghana. But you go and see what they have done with the shea butter, and they are importing it from us. They pick it from here and send it over there. Then there is, I never knew there was anything called black soup until I realized it was alatasamna. Black soup is alatasamna, and it's being used worldwide. The ladies tell us that when I was in the US, a lady told me that black soap gives you the skin of a baby. So they asked for black soap from us. It's alatasemna. But how many of us still continues to use alatasemna in Ghana? Many widely used products, such as plant-based medicines and cosmetics, are derived from traditional knowledge. Sadly, this vital knowledge is diminishing at an alarming rate, making it necessary for us to preserve it before all or most of it is completely lost. The consequent loss of indigenous knowledge in any community results in cultural gaps between generations and denies the community in particular and the world in general of this rich and powerful heritage of traditions that can be built upon for development. As a national consequence, therefore, indigenous knowledge together with modern scientific knowledge are important components in global, national, and community development. However, current scientific discourse and development tend to ignore and underestimate and sometimes undermine indigenous knowledge systems, which is often labeled as anti-scientific and outdated. So for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to share with you the relevance of indigenous knowledge in our lives. We shall look at some of the different types and establish its importance in national development. The world today, so we'll look at indigenous knowledge and health. The world today is grappling with complex diseases and challenges that had hitherto not been seen before. New, dangerous, and infectious diseases like SARS, Ebola, and COVID-19 have emerged with not a cure in sight. The latest one to rear its ugly head is the human metapneumovirus, HMPV, which has symptoms similar to COVID. The first strains have already been cited in Ghana, but right now we haven't been paying attention to it as we did with the COVID. The scare and devastation brought about by COVID forced scientists to work together with no inhibitions. And for the first time in many years, scientists were compelled to deposit the results of their research in open access repositories. With no cure in sight for COVID, scientists have begun to show renewed interest in finding solutions from nature. But if you want to turn to nature for answers, then the best way of finding out suitable remedies for specific diseases is to talk to the local people. And in my opinion, this is my personal opinion, there should, at the time we had the outbreak of COVID, there should have been a massive drive to screen local people around the world to identify the local plants that they were using, that were being used by them to curb respiratory diseases similar to COVID, and to at least assist their efficacy and apply it to the COVID menace. But all we're thinking about were vaccines that were not even based on plant medicine. So let's learn some examples from the past. An example we can learn from is during an outbreak of smallpox in Boston in the 1700s, around 1726. There was an outbreak of smallpox in Boston. The disease was claiming valuable lives in an alarming manner, since there was no cure for it. There was a young slave from Africa called Onesimus, and I think they were saying I can't remember where he came from, but he was a Negro, and most of the Negroes were around the West African area. He was called Onesimus and recommended to his master. He was a slave, so he had a master, that in Africa, when there was an outbreak of such diseases on such a scale, the pus from a person infected with the smallpox will be rubbed into an open wound on the arm of someone not infected, and this could help prevent him from contracting the disease. Once the infected material was introduced into the body, the person who underwent the procedure developed antibodies to fight the disease. This procedure, now known as inoculation, was thus developed to fight smallpox as far back in the 1700s through the application of indigenous knowledge. This was knowledge that had been passed on to Onesimus by his ancestors in Africa, and which he had kept in his head until it was needed. This is the knowledge that gave birth to the concept of vaccinations worldwide, and the concept upon which most vaccinations are currently based. At the time he disclosed this knowledge, there was a lot of resistance in his application. Indeed, he told his master, but his master was not even able to tell the people that it was from his servant or from his slave. So he attributed it to himself. But it was through reading of the master's diaries that it came to light that it was indeed Onesimus who gave him that knowledge, and it was not even from him. So even his slave master did not quite believe in him, but eventually he tried to take credit for this new development. But, and I say this with a lot of passion, had Onesimus not disclosed this knowledge to his master, we may probably be still struggling to find a cure for smallpox and similar diseases around the world. And in Ghana, quite a number of people, especially those in rural communities, depend on plant-based remedies as a complement to orthodox medicine to solve their health problems. In a study conducted in the Ofinso in the Ashanti region, local people reported that the use of forest plants for various ailments such as malaria, high blood pressure, respiratory disease, and many others. One of the common plants was for malaria is the neem tree, and there are so many others that they reported on. And it's worthy to note that many of these remedies have been used for centuries and have been passed on from generation to generation. Unfortunately, however, formula and dosages administered are not documented, making it difficult to stick to standard dosages. There are many such examples that exist in Ghana currently. However, the plants which are supposed to be efficacious do not attract the necessary attention that they deserve. So let me introduce you, ladies and gentlemen. Let me introduce you to the miracle berry. Its scientific name is Syncypalum dulcificum. I don't know if I said it right, the scientists among you. It's a plant native to West Africa with central origin in Ghana. The fruit has a unique effect on the taste buds and has been used for centuries by local people to make sour food taste sweet. These berries are well known through Ghana by various local names, including Asa or Asawa among the Akans, Tami in Ghana, and Ledidi among the Ewes. I wouldn't be surprised if there are some people, or even on this platform, who do not know, who may not have heard of this berry. They are usually found in home gardens and consumed more by children. It's not really regarded as an important economic plant by most people in Ghana, let alone by the policymakers. The berry itself has no taste, but when it is eaten after, any food eaten thereafter tastes sweet. The sweetener effect typically lasts from about half an hour to 2 hours, with intensity declining over time. In Ghana especially, it's often used to make palm wine, a local alcohol beverage that has over-fermented and that is bitter to taste sweet. Okay. Now, in the US, this berry is called the party berry. It is provided at some parties where sour drinks and different concoctions of drinks are served, and the party organizers will give a berry each to the party goers. They'll take it, and then after that, they'll serve them with these concoctions, the drinks, and they taste so good to them. And it has also been proposed as a treatment for taste changes experienced by some cancer patients. And the literature tells me that cancer, when you have gone through cancer, you have a metallic taste in your mouth. So some doctors in the US have been prescribing the miracle berry. You put it in your mouth, after which you are given some food which you can easily manage. And this miracle berry is also a giant step for those with diabetes, as this could be a great substitute for artificial sweeteners that are rich in vitamins and antioxidants with almost no calories. Despite its potential to transform the health sector as a natural sweetener, it's not as treasured in Ghana as one would expect. The worrying aspect of this is that many young people have not picked up this local knowledge yet. And I must say that those there are some companies from the US who are importing the miracle berries from Ghana into the US. And the scientists have studied this berry and they have started growing it in Florida. What about us? What have we done? We just have a shrub behind my garden, and when it's ripe, we just pick it just for fun. Results of a study on forest foods and medicines in the Ofinso district revealed that respondents between the ages of 18 and 20 had very little knowledge about this plant, and this is a cause for worry. I'll introduce you to another plant. It's called Tomatococcus danieli. In our local language, we call it Angnomo. And for those of you who don't know which plant I'm talking about, is the leaves we use to wrap food with the leaves. You go and buy, in the older times, you go and buy some wache. They'll use these leaves to wrap the wache for you. That is what it's called. It's called Tomatococcus danieli. And it has similar properties to the miracle berry. It can be found in stretching from, and when you look at the map, that red line stretching from Sierra Leone all the way to the Democratic Republic of Congo. The leaves of this plant are used in cooking and for wrapping food. In Nigeria, it's used to cook moimoi, a pudding made from beans. The leaves give the food a distinctive taste that is unique and pleasant. In traditional medicine, the fruits of this plant are used as laxative. The seeds are used as an emetic and for pulmonary conditions. The sap is also used as an antidote against venom, stings, and bites, whilst the sap of the leaves and fruits are used as a sedative and for insanity. Though all these uses have not been authenticated by science, it appears to be beneficial to the users who use them. One of the most important properties of this plant is as a natural sweetener, being the source of tomatin, an intensely sweet protein of interest to diabetics. When the fleshy part of the fruit is eaten, a molecule in the fruit binds to the tongue's taste buds, causing sour foods to taste sweet. Despite its importance on the global market, its use locally is still limited. Even getting it to wrap food in Ghana, I think, is becoming a challenge for us. It does not appear as if Ghana, for example, has benefited financially from the export of tomatin in the same way as cocoa has. And it's being exported. There are some Germans who are here who are getting them from the rural areas and exporting directly to Germany as a supplement for diabetic patients. And we here, it's even difficult to get the leaves to wrap our watches, let alone as a drug. Currently, tomatin is being extracted and imported out of the country for use in the food industry. So the question I'm asking is this fair trade or is it biopiracy? Biopiracy. So this brings us to the question of biopiracy. What is it? It's an issue that should be taken seriously by all those engaged in the transmission, use, and preservation of indigenous knowledge. And it doesn't apply to only our plants alone. The things that people have, the artifacts that they have been stealing and keeping, they are all part of the problem. Biopiracy refers to the use of biological material and associated traditional knowledge, usually without consent of the owners of the knowledge and for commercial gain. Usually, credit or compensation is not given to the communities that developed and maintained that knowledge. Biopiracy undermines the rights of indigenous communities and compromises the sustainable use of natural resources. And we should, as a nation, try to avoid it happening to us at all costs. Perhaps we should learn lessons from India by quickly mobilizing resources to preserve our indigenous knowledge. So what is the Indian story? And we have a story called the turmeric case. India has been grappling with biopiracy for so long. The story of the biopiracy of turmeric still rings fresh in the minds of many. For those of you who are familiar with Indian cuisine, the use of turmeric as a spice is a normal occurrence in meal preparation. The turmeric is that yellow powder that looks like curry. In India, the married women, they mix it with some concoctions and it becomes red. And that's what they put on the head of their foreheads when they are married. But in addition to this well-known use, turmeric also has medicinal qualities that make it useful in cosmetics and color industry. It has also been used for ages to treat burns and wounds by local traditional people. Now, there were two Indian-based expatriates working at the University of Mississippi Medical Center in 1995 who applied for and issued with a US patent for the discovery of the wound healing properties of turmeric. They claimed that they had identified turmeric with healing properties for wounds. According to them, this was new knowledge they had discovered, even though it had been in the public domain for ages. They acquired a patent for this, making it illegal for India to use turmeric without their permission and clearance. Therefore, a plant that is endemic to your own area, you need to seek permission from the patent holders before you can even use it. The government of India was furious and they appealed against this patent. But they had to prove their case. That is, it was an old Indian remedy that was already being used. And the only way out was to present documentation and evidence of the traditional use of turmeric by local people. So to cut a long story short, the Indian government won their appeal. And they did this by contacting the CSIR of India and other public institutions, getting any little documentation that had ever been made on turmeric. And they gathered all their reports and they sent it and they won their case. And I'm beginning to wonder, if I'd been in Ghana, would we have been able to present the evidence that was needed? So the Indian story now brings us back to reality. Their government subsequently took some drastic measures to protect their indigenous knowledge. They put in a lot of measures and legislation to prevent the piracy of their local knowledge. A massive drive was then undertaken to digitize and document all available indigenous knowledge available in India. They came up with the Traditional Knowledge Digital Library. Changes to educational policy to get children to learn more about their heritage were also introduced. So what is documentation? So we need to start thinking about documentation of our own local indigenous knowledge. So what is it? Documentation is a process in which indigenous knowledge is identified, collected, organized, registered, or recorded in some way as a means to dynamically maintain, manage, use, disseminate, and protect the knowledge according to specific goals. The process is systematic. So if you take a simple photograph in the field or an isolated record of something somebody has said or written, it's not considered to be documentation. Documentation is systematic and is continuous. So documentation and digitization of indigenous knowledge are effective tools for defensive protection from biopiracy. It also helps in the reduction of misappropriation of indigenous knowledge without compensation by multinational entities, as can be seen in India's story. It's also important for the preservation of knowledge. In this digital era, indigenous knowledge can be in various formats to ensure its preservation, accessibility, and dissemination. And the format chosen will depend on the nature of the knowledge, the preferences of the indigenous communities, and the resources available. And so here we come. What is the role of information professionals in this? Librarians, archivists, curators have traditionally been the custodians of tangible literary materials. And as librarians, and I'm a professional librarian, our preoccupation has always been with published knowledge, published literature, books, journals, articles. We have not really considered indigenous knowledge as part of our domain. In recent times, however, indigenous knowledge has gained prominence in many countries, with efforts being made to preserve it. The International Federation of Library Associations, IFLA, acknowledges this and recommends that libraries should preserve indigenous knowledge. But since indigenous knowledge indigenous knowledge is knowledge that can be found in the minds of people, a standard procedure for collection and processing needs to be developed. So how should we handle indigenous knowledge? Handling indigenous knowledge is one of the biggest challenges for library and information specialists. The challenge of processing begins with the recognition of indigenous knowledge as a resource and as a distinct system of knowledge with its own management regimes. The documentation of indigenous knowledge can take many forms and shapes. It can be done through written records and files, videos, photos, pictures, images, and audio files. All of these can culminate into a database, can be developed in a traditional indigenous language or in other languages. The processing of indigenous knowledge starts with the collection policy, just as in a traditional library. Here you develop your collection policy and decide on which type of indigenous knowledge you are interested in. Because it's a broad area and it stretches across food, artifacts, and all kinds of things. So you need to delimit what you want to document. You also need to include how you intend to store the information using the different forms we've already discussed. We started digitization of forest food and medicines. And at CSIR, we decided to limit ourselves to indigenous knowledge on forest foods and medicine. That is in a subject area we had expertise in. The next stage is to acquire the information from a selected source. Now, when it comes to indigenous knowledge, data can be obtained directly through interviews, communications, observations, images, recordings from communities themselves. This involves contact with the members of the local community, the chief or the head of households. On-site field work includes continued interaction with community members even after the initial contact. This can also be obtained through a desk study. Indigenous knowledge is often expressed in local languages that may not be familiar to the researcher. It's important, therefore, for the librarian or the researcher to work with people who are able to understand local dialects and translate them accurately. The library cannot cover all indigenous knowledge forms since the scope is so broad. So libraries will have to decide which area they want to devote their attention to. All the data or the knowledge must be validated for its accuracy and truthfulness. So you go to the field and a farmer tells you that a particular plant can cure, let's say, cancer or can cure hypertension or something like that. How do you know he's telling the truth? It's knowledge in his head. He has told you, but how do you know he's telling you the truth? Because when we did our survey in the Ofinso area, some of the people, local people, were reluctant to tell us the truth because they thought we wanted to appropriate their knowledge for our own benefit, for pecuniary benefit. So they were reluctant. So if he tells you that this particular plant can be used to treat hypertension, how are you able to know it is true? You need to validate the source. And you can do that by visiting another area and finding out what they use the same plant for. And you see that there'll be a point of convergence and you can begin to decide what it can be used for. You can also go into the literature because some scientists may have started working on this, or mention may have been made somehow about the plants, and you can use that to confirm whether what he or she is saying is true or not. Libraries may face challenges in validating the information given out, ensuring that it's accurate. Nonetheless, we need to look at it. So you gather the information, just as in we do for our books, you have to decide which area it belongs to. Is it medicinal? Is it food? You need to have your fields, the different fields for identification purposes. I hope you can hear me. It's raining so hard over here.
You are loud and clear. No.
Loud and clear.
I'm loud and clear. Okay. All right. Thank you. And there may be added cost to the management of the library due to additional work schedules to collect information. But we must work within the framework of the law. And what does that mean? It means that if there is any law, for example, in India, they do have laws on how to use indigenous knowledge. Indeed, if you want to use a particular plant, you need to go through some specific procedures to get access to it or to buy the patent, because a lot of the things they have patented. For example, and India has been suffering with this biopiracy. There's this, what we call the basmati rice. The ladies will know much about it. And it's apparently, basmati rice is connected to a particular location. It is not, a species. It's particular because it's grown, let's say it's grown in Kumasi, so it's called Kumasi rice. So some scientists from outside, when they took the basmati rice and went and patented it and called it basmati rice, even though they were growing it in America, somewhere in a corner in America, and they called it basmati rice. So the Indian government again went back and told them that you can use any other name for it, but you cannot call it basmati rice, because basmati is connected to a particular region in India. And they won that one as well. But it has been a huge challenge for many people trying to fight off biopiracy. And it's about time that as a country in Ghana, we begin to identify the useful treasures in our forests and prevent people from cutting down the whole forest just for gold. And you know, when you cut down a tree, it's not even the tree that is the problem. It's the other treasures that are the medicines and the foods that is the problem. We lose more of it in value and in quantum and value than even that one particular tree that is cut off to make way for the gold. So who are the beneficiaries from the process of this knowledge? If anybody, if we are able to mobilize ourselves and then we patent some of these things, who gets the money that's coming out from it? And some of it should go to the local people to improve their quality of life and such. So there should be a sharing formula for process from indigenous knowledge. Should there be? I believe there should be. And then we have to look at intellectual property rights, and that should be applied where applicable. And then patents that meet the basic requirements can also be developed. So some considerations on indigenous knowledge we need to keep in mind are the following. When valuable traditional products are discovered, the beneficiaries are usually not the local people. For example, the tomatin that is being extracted is exported directly to Europe. Miracle berries are being exported directly to the USA. There is no evidence in Ghana that tomatin is being extracted and used. So though the discovery is a local one, the benefits are global. How widely spread is this knowledge? How many people have even heard of their existence? How do we ensure that the knowledge is transferred and documented and the benefits shared equitably? So I've given a summary. Let me give the summary. I've given examples of 2 valuable plants that could be important to the economy of Ghana. And there are many more. And all we need to do is to do the research. The research, the local level decision making starts at the local level with the local people. And these plans have the possibility of transforming the health sector in Ghana. Indeed, we are talking about not having enough money in our kitty, but there are other ways of making more money than just looking at the gold and the things that are being sent out. So we need to get our acts together. We need to get our scientists together with the local people, with the publisher, with the writers, and to conduct research that can keep us, research that can preserve our knowledge for days on end. And knowledge on these 2 species discussed above seems to be dwindling among local people. The new generation of young people do not even know the uses with which these plants can be put. Consequently, efforts at conserving the habitat of these species is at a minimum, and we risk losing them altogether. And indeed, in addition to documenting the knowledge and the procedure I have talked about, collecting the information, analyzing them, putting them together in a database, audio or a film or whatever you want to do. You can video them, you can audio them, you can take photographs, but you need to systematically have your different fields and then you document them. You can ultimately, it can be in a register, you can put them in a database, but you need to make sure and you need to take the pictures, photographs. So if this plant, we are talking about plant A being good for hypertension, you need to have a picture of the leaves, you need to have a picture of the trunk, the roots, and the fruits and the seeds. And that is what will keep it, because when they destroy the forest and these things are no longer available, nobody will even remember how they look because they've already been destroyed. And believe you or me, and what we are doing to our environment is so bad, because one tree, let's take the Odum tree, it takes about 100 years to mature, big, huge Odum tree that can be used, which means in my lifetime, if I plant an Odum tree seedling, it can never mature before I die, which means what we are cutting down has been planted years before by our forefathers. But we are not taking a single minute to think about how to preserve the fauna, plant and fauna itself, as well as protecting the knowledge about it. And if we don't do that, we can also digitize, but there'll be nothing to show for it. So consequently, efforts at conserving the habitat of these species is at a minimum, and we risk losing them. And we need to put in some efforts to conserve the habitats. So we talk about them, we document them, but we preserve them so we can use them. So as I end this talk, I want to end with a message of hope for our indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledge should not be looked down upon, should not be considered inferior to any other form of knowledge. We need to ensure that our forests remain intact so that the valuable medicines and foods hidden there can be used to our benefit. Our future as a nation depends on making sure that our precious flora and fauna are not destroyed. The more we preserve our forests, rivers, and food sources, the more knowledge we can continue to document. We need to incorporate indigenous knowledge into our curriculum perfectly at the basic level. We need as a nation to enact legislation to protect our indigenous knowledge. So I will end with a Native American proverb which says that when the last tree has been cut down, the last fish caught, the last river poisoned, only then will we realize that one cannot eat money. And I will also add my own. It is only then that we will begin to regret our actions, because the documented knowledge will just be on paper. Thank you very much. I end my talk here, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Margaret Sraku-Lartey. Indeed, your presentation epitomizes indigenous knowledge. So you are a walking, I would say, indigenous dictionary. And we have all learned so much. I, for one, I have been taking a lot of notes because I'm one of your students of indigenous knowledge. I have started a series of, I would say, research on indigenous knowledge, and I think I have learned a lot. My questions are many, but for the sake of time, we would invite Dr. Christopher Prom to continue with the conversation. And colleagues, keep your notes, your questions ready. At the end of this presentation, you have the opportunity to ask all your questions. Chris, you are on. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And if you'll give me just a minute, I'll go ahead and share my screen here with all of you. Hey, thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of you very much for this opportunity to address you this afternoon, which is this morning here where I am at the University of Illinois. And in particular, I'd like to express my gratitude to you, Dr. Owusu-Ansah, for the introduction and for moderating this webinar, as well as to Vice Chancellor Akapovi for the opening remarks. I also offer my appreciation and gratitude to the organizing committee and to Dr. Florence Plocke in particular for the invitation to address you today. Undoubtedly, the topic of preserving Ghana's cultural heritage is a weighty one, and one that I know is on all of your minds, given the upcoming anniversary. But it's also one about which I feel a certain amount of trepidation in approaching you and speaking to you about. In fact, I will be the first to admit that I am far from an expert in Ghana's history and culture. And in this respect, I'm very grateful to you, Dr. Sraku-Lartey, for your introduction to Ghanaian indigenous knowledge and its value to the world in health and industry and in agriculture. And it's very informative to hear about the examples you shared. I do hope to visit Ghana someday and to learn directly about the work that you and others are doing to preserve records and information that people can use to construct a complete picture of Ghanaian society and the value that indigenous knowledge brings to Ghana and to all of society. So instead of reflecting directly on Ghana's indigenous knowledge, which I'm not, qualified to do, what I'd like to do instead is offer you a description of some work that I am helping to lead here at the University of Illinois with our partners, including Dr. Plaki, as well as other people who I believe are on the call or on the webinar this morning. And as indicated, this is a project that's known as Catalyzing African Community Archives for Social Good. And the impetus for this project is very much focused on facilitating the preservation and documentation of indigenous knowledge. We believe that community archives can play a role as one of the main supporting structures for an indigenous knowledge documentation system along the lines of what you described, Dr. Sraku-Lartey. So from experience with this project, and I'll give you a little bit of background about myself and about the project, we'll try to draw some lessons about key activities that information professionals can engage in. Again, building on the information in the first part of this webinar, as you seek to foster these community archives and the preservation of indigenous cultural knowledge that's unique to particular communities, regions, peoples, and societies. A lot of really good points were raised. Very much in agreement with what the perspective you're bringing, Dr. Sraku-Lartey, about bringing the benefits of these archives back and the knowledge back to the communities. So I'll just start by saying I'm very humbled to be here. I can only relate my own experiences to you, while hoping also to understand and relate to your experiences as well. Just to say I'm very much looking forward to questions and discussion. So by way of background then about me, as I said, to this topic of community archives, I'll be the first to admit that I bring an orientation that's formed in the Western historical tradition. So in the early 1990s and early 2000s, I was trained as a historian. And in that work, I focused my own attention on community organizations in the United Kingdom, which were called friendly societies. These were mutual aid organizations that had formed during the Industrial Revolution, and in which workers sought to provide themselves sort of a rainy day funds. So from that experience, I found that I really loved the process of identifying and helping people preserve records that document their experience. As I found, as Dr. Sraku-Lartey, as you indicated, you do have to verify what people are telling you. But what I found is that many of the records that were really, really useful for understanding society in the 19th century were not necessarily in government archives or academic institutions, because the type of knowledge that people held was downplayed. But in fact, a lot of those materials remained in people's homes or in community organizations, or in fact, they were implicit knowledge or knowledge that was held by a community member, and really only in their head or in oral form. So that experience of working with people and tracking down their records led me to move my own work from that of a historian, that is interpreting and understanding records, over to that of it being an archivist, who was someone who sought to preserve records in the context in which they were created or used. So subsequently to that, I worked for 18 years as an archivist here at the University of Illinois, in addition to serving in some administrative roles here as well, which is currently where I'm working. So in case you're wondering, the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign is a large comprehensive research university enrolling over 50,000 students, and we're right in the heart of the Midwestern part of the United States. really far from any major cities in a lot of ways. But we are one of the largest research universities in the country and also one of the largest recipients of funding from the U.S. National Science Foundation with the focusing on engineering and agricultural sciences. I'm really happy to say that we have some faculty members here in our College of Agriculture that have partnered for a long time with partners in many African nations, helping to both develop agriculture as well as understand indigenous agriculture systems and how those can be used to address topics such as changing climate, developing more resilient food and systems, and very much appreciate the work that they're doing. So my work as an archivist here at the university was focused on acquiring and preserving university records, and only rarely did I get the chance to touch on community archives. Yet this work has led me to also to digital project and planning and preservation practices that I think can be brought to community organizations that might not be able to host digital repositories and access systems on their own. So I very much second the call for partnerships between academic institutions in Ghana and elsewhere that can help communities preserve their oral knowledge and digitize photographs and other materials. So currently I'm working in a role here as coordinator for sponsored research development, in which I helped to our faculty to raise resources to supplement some of our existing projects. Illinois, you might know, and I'll just mention here briefly, is really famous for being the home to our former president, Barack Obama. So in case you're wondering and would like to orient a little bit, that's where he is from. Okay, so my interest in community archives and indigenous knowledge really took a jump during my involvement with a conference that I helped organize here at the University of Illinois in September of 2023. This was the IPRES meeting. And for those who are not familiar with it, IPRES is a major international conference dedicated to the topic of digital preservation. And historically, this IPRES conference has met for alternating years in Asia, in Europe, and in the United States. And it's been a very much of a Western-focused conference, I would admit. But for many years, those who've been hosting the conference have been keen to broaden membership, and in particular to support participants from Africa in attending and sharing both their needs as well as their perspectives and knowledge. So there was a plan to bring quite a few people from Africa to the post-pandemic meeting, which took place in Glasgow, Scotland, which happened in 2002, but unfortunately that plan fell through. But we were glad that many of those who wished to attend the Glasgow meeting were able to come here to the University of Illinois instead and were welcomed into town here, as our statue, which you see on the screen here, the alma mater, welcomes everyone who attends our campus. So for the 2023 meeting, we were fortunate enough to arrange for delegates for the conference to attend from Kenya, from Ghana, and from Tunisia. And this entire group, including Dr. Plaki, were really, really dogged in their determination to travel to Illinois. And these photos just show many of the team members for what later came to be this project that I'm helping to lead here, the Catalyzing African Community Archives for Social Good project at the conference. We were really glad that we were able to host this group of people at the IPRES 2023 meeting, because conference participants for the first time were able to hear about the work that they were undertaking throughout Africa, which touched on the topics of community-engaged archiving and preservation of indigenous knowledge. And we had participants both on site here in Illinois and also some online participants. So as you can see from the list of talks here, we heard presentations on a range of challenges and about the really excellent work that was taking place to meet them. This included topics about how universities can partner to preserve audio archives, the assessment of preservation and capacity building with institutional archives, and also digital preservation as it relates to communities and national governments. But within this, there was one theme in particular that really resonated with me, given my own past work as an archivist. And that was the existing work that was taking place in a variety of African nations, including Ghana, to digitize, to preserve, and to provide access to materials that might fall outside the bounds of traditional academic works or government record keeping. As has previously been mentioned, the role that libraries and archives have played in the past has largely been focused on preserving scientific knowledge within the Western tradition, of how knowledge is defined, preserving printed documentation and other types of materials. But I was really glad to see these presentations about materials that we might consider to be part of community or personal archives that are much more rarely preserved in academic and government archives, and a real desire from the participants from Africa to find ways to preserve those materials. So, for example, one of the participants in our Catalyzing Community Archives project, Maureen Kenga, who is from Kenya, presented her work on the digitization of knowledge about food production. Dr. Plaki Florence spoke about the digitization of oral traditions in Ghana, specifically that is relating to the Damba festivals. And Gladys Kemboy, who's another participant, on how digital archives can address pressing social issues in northern regions of Kenya. So each of these projects were in some way about the creation or digitization of materials documenting an aspect of cultural or indigenous knowledge that's not adequately preserved or accessible. And implicit behind these presentations was a desire to incorporate good digital preservation planning and practices from the start of the projects, so you're not reaching the end and then trying to find a way to preserve knowledge that may not have been recorded in a valid way or in a good way. So what these presentations really demonstrated to me and to the rest of this IPRES community that I was a part of is that there's important digital preservation work and planning happening within African communities to document these issues and to find ways to connect indigenous knowledge more directly into repositories. And also a desire that if this is fostered over time and if partnerships are developed with some of the Western institutions, such as that I represent, it can lead to an enriching of the digital preservation community generally, as African perspectives and work are integrated more fully into our practices, and as we in turn give credit and provide as much credit and assistance as we can to our partners. So I'll also mention that at this conference, we heard an outstanding keynote speaker, Sherry Williams, who is the second person from the left in this photograph, along with the other keynote speakers at the conference, who were Quinn Dombrowski and Ricky Punzelan, who also touched on topics of community archiving in their own ways and in their own contexts, which for Ricky is in the Philippines, where he's led some really excellent work relating to the preservation of Philippine cultural knowledge. So, but in her talk, Sherry Williams told us about her work as director of the Bronzeville Historical Society, which is an outstanding example of a community archives here in the United States, which documents the history and culture of a South Side neighborhood in Chicago, Illinois, which this neighborhood, Bronzeville, is a really integral part of African American history and, in fact, industrialization as well here in the United States. And one of the key points that Sherry made is that academic institutions need and can be much more open to collaboration with people in the community who are custodians of records or who have cultural knowledge that is not documented, but that can be preserved through creating oral histories or through interviews. Sherry reiterated to us that the communities do have an impressive storehouses of these implicit knowledge, which can be brought to bear in preserving and describing such materials in partnership with academic institutions. So she showed us many examples of the materials she was preserving and digitizing, and discussed her collaboration with the University of Chicago and with other academic institutions. So the value of both these formal presentations at IPRES, the keynote address, and some informal conversation and informal events came to fruition during a long conversation we had at the last conference event in Chicago. And several of the participants there described their desire to use some of the digital preservation and digitization resources that have been developed by and for use in the global north, but to bring their knowledge and expertise to bear in adapting them to suit circumstances for preserving community knowledge and indigenous knowledge in Africa. What they wanted to do and what I'm seeking to help do is make those resources that we have, some of the materials and training things that we have here, more useful and valuable to community champions and to those who hold specific knowledge as members of African communities. The need that we see here, at least as I perceive it, is to embed some of the best practices for digitization, archiving, and digital preservation within community organizations, and to help those who, may be an elder in a community or may have knowledge that needs to be preserved with enough knowledge about those practices to be able to connect with academic institutions, to build trusted relationships with them, and to connect this expertise to the organizations, while also mobilizing some resources to help both the communities and academic partners, raise support. So in some ways, what this means is boiling down some of the complex and robust digital guidance that we have here in the West into modules and training materials that are concise, targeted, and concrete, fully integrating the perspectives of the participants and partners. One of the things you find when you work with the digital preservation and digitization resources that have been developed for us here, for example, in my own institution or in other, larger institutions that have fairly robust funding, is that there's a complexity and abstractness to them that makes them hard to use directly in communities and in community archives. So we're hoping that by taking some of these resources and in making them more practical for use in Africa and elsewhere, the core principles and practices can be applied in any circumstance. So after discussion at the IPRES 2023 meeting, the attendees from African countries recruited additional partners. We added a key European partner who is Sarah Cummings at the Knowledge Management for Development community. And this is a global community of practice for providing support for international development and knowledge management practitioners, which maintains a strong presence in Africa and which historically has had a connection to aid agencies that work on community development issues and seeking to develop reciprocal partnerships with those groups. We've also added some support from the Digital Preservation Coalition, which is a UK-based nonprofit which seeks to embed digital preservation best practices throughout the world. So in November of 2023, we're provided the opportunity to apply for some funding through a university program here, which is a call to action program that seeks to support both local projects and international partnerships. While this is an internal University of Illinois grant, it seeks to support efforts that address structural disparities within communities. And in this respect, the resources that we're developing are intended to focus not only here on the state of Illinois, but can have some global impact. So we were successful in achieving some limited funding through this program. And as a result, have been able to put together a team of individuals working on this Catalyzing African Community Archives project. You can see many of them listed here, and I offer my deepest thanks to this group who is doing excellent work to develop materials. So from the University of Illinois, we've included some of our library faculty and staff, leaders from our Mortensen Center for International Library Programs, our Preservation Services Unit, and we're also glad to have the support of a few graduate students here from the university, both Gladys Kemboy and Ruby Martinez, both of whom have deep interest in partnering with community archives, building partnerships between communities and academic libraries. So what is this project? The major goal for it is really to build capacity to help expand the range of people and groups who can participate in digital preservation efforts, and to help those groups partner with academic institutions to preserve records that speak to current economic, social, and health issues, along the lines that Dr. Sraku-Lartey was mentioning. So as Ambassador Dr. Joseph Kiplagat, who's one of the participants in the project, stated in a message to the project members as we're forming this project, really the goal of this project is to preserve some of this indigenous knowledge and to find ways to help these traditions, cultural materials that are at extreme risk of being lost to be preserved. And by doing that in partnership with community champions and ensuring that the community champions' roles and the community's experiences, value is really centered and that they are able to reap the full benefits of the collections, not that they're, somehow taken advantage of or used instead by Western organizations, but really to build capacity within the institutions in Africa itself to develop and build these programs. So one of the things we seek to do is build capacity for communities to participate in projects like the British Library's Endangered Archives program. This is a great program. It's led to the digitization of over 9,000 collections worldwide. Very well designed because it includes not only the preservation of the materials on British library systems, but also in local archives and communities as well. And this has come to be very important because, as many of you may know, about a year and a half ago, the British library systems were hacked and there was a ransomware attack. And it was good because most of the materials that were generated by this program, in addition to being preserved in the British Library, their systems are also preserved locally within the countries in which they were digitized. So in many cases, have been able to restore those collections from the copies that exist in the source institutions. So we're looking to build capacity for organizations to participate in projects such as this. There's another opportunity that exists, which I'd like to draw your attention to, which is the Modern Endangered Archives program, which is sponsored by the University of California at Los Angeles. And this program offers digitization grants as well as storage and access options, again, ensuring that ownership of the materials and ability to benefit and profit from them remains with the host communities, while also building a research collection and a relationship with each of the grantees that they award funding to. So you'll see, for instance, there are several groups locally or close to Ghana that have participated with this group. For example, the Archives of the Union of Teachers of Burkina Faso has digitized and contributed their records to the program. But one of the things we find is that to participate in either of these programs, whether it's the Endangered Archives program or the Modern Endangered Archives program, is you need to develop a certain amount of capacity, and organizations in communities may not even be in a position to apply for these grants until they have some basic understanding of how to work to preserve materials. So the project itself, is seeking to build this sense of epistemic justice to ensure that we pay full heed to questions of whose knowledge is heard, preserved, and accessible, and by therefore make a small contribution to helping local and other knowledge that can be developed, applied in sustainable development projects. And at the same time, we have an awareness that knowledge of best practice as it works in Africa should and indeed needs to be incorporated into these resources and can also help inform our own practice here in the global north. So the core concept behind this grant is that we're hoping to foster a community of practice, a group of people who share a common concern and set of problems, and over the course of the year, work to develop resources that can be used to capture and preserve materials digitally in repositories. For example, a repository perhaps that the Technical University of Accra or another institution within Ghana is able to provide, but also with duplication of those copies in partner repositories. So the major work product that we've been working on is the development of a training curriculum. And it's a training curriculum that's really aimed at something that all of you or that others in Ghana or elsewhere could use in partnering with communities and community champions. So it'd be something that information professionals can tap into to help community members get a basic orientation to and the competence and skill set that they would need to have to create and manage local community archives. So as such, this project seeks a sense of empowerment to understand what would be necessary to develop community leaders and knowledge holders with digitization and digital curation skills, so they can be true partners with academic institutions and government agencies, building that sense of community and trust, that was indicated as being so necessary in order to build these archives. So putting this curriculum together isn't necessarily a straightforward or an easy task, but each of the partners on the project on the African side in Ghana and elsewhere have connections to such groups and leaders. And we're hoping that by fostering these connections, we can invest in and strengthen local knowledge systems. In fact, the large motivation for the project is simply to better understand what is most needed and how can the project seek to support those whose knowledge and records should be preserved but currently is not. And therefore building a common understanding across a group of people who will be coming together as we seek to develop resources that the project is responsible for. Our initial focus was on the development of needs assessments from the partner organizations, and using information from these assessments as well as an environmental scan and a literature review. We've been subsequently meeting from August of last year through now, focusing on the development of these materials. We will be planning to meet here at the University of Illinois with our partners in May of this year to review those materials and to ensure that they're aligned and most useful to the group as they seek to go and use them in communities. While we'd originally planned to host some training sessions directly in Ghana, in Kenya, and Botswana, that won't be happening during the current grant, which ends in July, but we'll be considering the possibility for that to happen separately, given the resources that are available in the first phase. So I'd like to just briefly mention some of the common themes that emerged from the needs assessment. These indicate, which I don't think will be a huge surprise here, a clear need for digitization and preservation of cultural, historical, and agricultural knowledge. Another significant point is the desire to engage local communities and stakeholders directly in the preservation process. So they suggested implementing training, workshops, and awareness programs directly in communities to help them build their capacity and knowledge for preservation. And of course, another common theme was addressing resource constraints, particularly around technology and the need for open source tools to preserve cultural heritage materials. Another theme, as has already been touched on a little bit by our first speaker, is navigating the legal and ethical practices related to traditional knowledge so that communities can ensure to benefit from traditional knowledge, as well as a strong and indigenous knowledge, as well as a strong desire to build partnerships and to collaborate with more institutions to extend our research and project effectiveness. And finally, there were some challenges mentioned relating to technological learning curves, to metadata management, and to funding need, all of which require thoughtful solutions. So we have some excellent starting points that were used to develop these resources and training materials. There's a list of some materials through the International Council of Archives that Julietta Rima from Moi University is managing. And this curriculum is really intended for students, but we feel like by adapting some of it for community members, we can take the core aspects of it and make it useful to them. Similarly, the Endangered Archives Program and Digital Preservation Coalition provide some very helpful and useful resources. In particularly the the Community Archives Digital Preservation Community Toolkit is quite helpful because it's aimed at groups that are for the first time engaging with issues of community archives and indigenous knowledge. Okay, here is a list of some of the specific training modules that we're developing and which we will discuss at our May meeting. You can see they range from just a basic introduction to digital preservation through digitization, oral history creation and preservation, which Dr. Sraku-Lartey, as you indicated, there's a strong need for people to have good skills in that area. Managing legal and community ethical considerations, creating metadata, and we aim to provide really practical, actionable knowledge that can support effective preservation and to make all of these resources freely available to not only the project participants, but really anyone who wants to use them. They'll all be available under an open source license, so they'll be able to be used and remixed and extended in any way that would be helpful. And our hope is that after taking the training, community members will be in a better place to be able to participate and cooperate and collaborate with academic institutions or government archives. Here are some of the projects that we might consider for use of the training materials during the second phase of the project, for which we would be seeking, additional support. But our project partners come, many of them from Moi University in Eldoret, Kenya, which holds the archives of the Kenyan journalist Hilary Nweno. And while a small portion of these have been digitized, there's a large portion of audiovisual materials which need conservation and preservation, and which could offer better preservation strategies. Also have a project from Maureen Kenga at the Kenya State Department of Planning. Her project is seeking to revive agriculture by improving and adapting indigenous agricultural practices in light of changing climate. In this project, the aim is to encourage youth that have, through digitization and digital thinking, to preserve indigenous knowledge about intercropping and other methods that families and communities use to promote better food security by taking videos of those practices, interviewing people who have knowledge, and then storing it in a repository platform. And I also hope that the curriculum we're developing can support Dr. Plaki's work and that of many of other youth to document aspects of Ghanaian culture, such as the Damba Festival, which Florence is so deeply knowledgeable about. There is a need for additional resource mobilization. Of course, the University of Illinois is developing and providing these resources, is proud to invest what we can in this one-year project to develop this training program. But there are many other ideas that the group can collaboratively pursue to bring the training curriculum forward. And in particular, we hope that after the project has completed its initial phase in July of this year, that partners might find opportunities to host training sessions with Indigenous knowledge holders or leaders. We had hoped, for example, to be able to partner with USAID, which, as some of you may be aware, is no longer possible given, the presidential transition that we've had here in the U.S. But there are other aid organizations that we may be able to partner with. So if an opportunity can be identified, training could be provided to students, to youth, to community elders as well, to help them better partner with archives, museums, and libraries. So I'd like to close with just a few reflections on the work so far and what I regard as sort of the key activities and attributes that we as information professionals should pursue and can pursue in seeking to build these community archives. As I said at the beginning, I'm very much at the beginning of this journey in community archives and preservation of Indigenous knowledge, but there's three particular and specific activities that strike me as being very important. The first and most important step is to build partnerships with community advocates and with Indigenous knowledge holders. Admittedly, this is a challenging aspect for the project for me, being centered here in the United States. And the funding that we were supplied can't cover all aspects of that or building those connections. But working through these issues has come to help me realize that many of you are in an excellent position to work with people in your own communities. And if you can identify people like Sherry Williams, who are respected and in a position to identify materials that would benefit from preservation, that is really the most important step, building a set of trust and a connection and an ongoing relationship, not just an interview, a gathering of indigenous knowledge and then calling it a day, but really bringing back over a long period of time the benefits of that documentation to the community. Second, I would just emphasize it's important to pursue sort of what I would call the right-sized technology options. So what works for a large academic institution like my own in terms of scanning equipment or storage servers won't necessarily be right for most organizations. All that said, there are technologies, in particular cloud-based services such as the Internet Archive or Africa Commons, which make it possible for small organizations to preserve content at a relatively low or no cost. And finally, I would say when working with communities, it's important to be able to work from a playbook or a sort of a standard set of procedures, as Dr. Sraku-Lartey noted. And there are many great resources that can be tapped in here. There are resources like the Community Archives Digital Preservation Toolkit, and the training we're aiming to make available is intended to make those resources accessible in Ghana and elsewhere. For as an example of this slide, and the next kind of provide examples of what such a playbook might look like. One of the most important things has already been indicated is helping people understand the need to develop a collection policy and what you're focusing on. And this will be an aspect of the training that we provide, as well as some basic tips about how to organize your digital files, using good naming conventions and just, communicating some of these really basic principles of good digital collection management. And finally, I'd just like to close with three, in addition to these activities, what I regard as sort of the three key attributes that information professionals should seek to show in building community archives. The first of these is simple curiosity. As we look to particular communities, we can and should center their experiences out of a true desire to learn and grow together. And, I was very glad, for instance, this morning to already have learned things about the miracle berry and, other indigenous plants in Ghana that are useful. So, as we look to particular communities, we can take time to center the relationships and exercise that curiosity. So this leads to a second point, which is that when we bring our own knowledge as information professionals and experience into communities, we can and should do that with a respectful humility, intellectual humility, realizing that while our own principles and practices hold great value, they need to be lived out within a set of equally valuable, respected community norms and practices. It is particularly important for people like me coming from the West who don't have existing relationships with communities in Ghana or elsewhere. And this is where it's important to apply, legal and ethical frameworks for working with indigenous communities while also approaching relationships in a way that seeks to respect the context and existing relationships in the communities. And this is an area where if I ever have the good fortune to work with any communities in Ghana or to visit Ghana, I'm sure that I have much to learn. And finally, I would just mention and reiterate the point about reciprocity. When academic institutions collaborate with communities, both have much to gain and contribute to each other, but we do need to realize that in the past histories of exploitation and, what we've heard from our first speaker are a constant concern and worry. So again, just keep in mind that reciprocity is the most important factor. Gives me hope for the future, as we've heard also from others this morning. And while it may sound, somewhat simplistic to say or trite, my own involvement with the partners on this project has given me great respect and admiration for the ways in which you have all sought to develop and activate partnerships within your own context and country. So with that, I'd like to thank all of you. Just very briefly, note here that the work that I'm describing is supported by our Vice Chancellor for Research Office at the university, and I'm very grateful again to all of you for the opportunity to address you this morning, and more particularly to learn from all of you now in the question and answers. Thank you.
Hello. That has been a very insightful, fun, and interesting presentations from both panelists. We are so grateful. May I take the opportunity to formally acknowledge the following people. Professor Aramade from the University of Ibadan, Dr. Peggy Ngozomo Martinson Center, University of Illinois, Dr. Juliet Emery, Senior Lecturer from Kemboy, Folashade Adepoki from Nigeria, Annie Kruger, Mamadou Lamidu, all the Ghanaian participants, we thank you for being with us. We really acknowledge you being with us and being part of this great presentation. You may kindly drop your questions in the question box. Now, one question I have here. Any of the speakers can please respond to this one. How many countries or persons can claim patents on plants grown in almost 6 countries in Africa? Who owns the knowledge in this case? The question actually came from Folashade Adipojo from Nigeria.
Yeah, can I answer that, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Can I?
Yes, please, you can.
Okay. When it comes to plants, the plant itself, nobody owns a patent to it. It is the product that comes out of the plants. For example, you develop a medical, some kind of medicine that is supposed to solve a particular problem. You can patent that. That is your research. But the plant that grows outside it, and I gave you the example of Tomatococcus. It grows all the way from Sierra Leone to the Congo. But it is what we do with it and what we extract from it that becomes patentable or that we can prescribe to ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sraku-Lartey. Please, this goes to the panel members or the participants. If anybody has a question, kindly raise up your hand. I will unmute you so you ask your question. Thank you. Dr. Betty Fanian, I can see your hand up. Kindly go ahead and ask your question.
All right, thank you. Betty Fanian here from Ghana. I want to, first of all, give my contribution and also ask the question. This is a very sensitive issue, and I think that it has really been addressed well. And I'm so much glad to, for the first time, be part of such a program. It is very important thing that we don't forget our roots and our culture, and most importantly, where we come from. You know, at the center of any culture lies the traditions, the histories, and the heritage, serving as legacies being transmitted across generations to the down generations. However, these elements are also affected by traditions and customs of external groups that draws or feed on them for their survival. And of course, we all know that there is hardly any culture that has not been touched by modernity. And for that reason, so many things are going out of our system and of our, as part of our legacies and inheritance, that we need to document them. The first presenter made mention of the fact that we must be able to preserve our IK, I mean, the indigenous knowledge that we have. And of course, I support her. However, there are a few things that are going down the drain that is affecting the contribution of these elements or the survival of our indigenous knowledge. I personally did a project on indigenous knowledge, documenting indigenous knowledge using photography, only photography. And that is my specialty, heritage photographer. And so I did a project work with the first community in Central Region who more or less happened to be the first people who had encounter with the Europeans. And when I got to them, I realized that they have a lot of knowledge, a lot of, be it ethnobotany, food culture, I mean, a lot of things. And I stayed with them. I did ethnography, so I stayed with them for about 2 years. And I was able to live with them to see how they do their things. And I was able to document a lot of things from them. Now, my question is, do you have any platform from here that some of the data collections that I made, you could help me to publish them? I came up with books. I haven't published them yet. If you could help me to publish them, or there could be partnership to make sure that these informations are kept well. That is my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Please, the speakers, anybody again can answer this one.
I'm really not sure how to answer this because she, if I get the question correctly, she she did an ethnographic study, so she stayed with the people, documented their activities and everything else. And she wants to publish that. And who is the beneficiary? Who does she intend the beneficiary to be? Because this is knowledge that have been gathered by a particular people. Are you publishing for your? I'm not sure whether for posterity. What's the aim of the publication? Because right now I have no idea which institution can publish that. But then she has to be mindful of the fact that the people took her in trust and took her in for 2 years. She lived with them, and they're very, for lack of a better word, the very secrets that they had, she was able to document it. Would it be good to publish that put that in the public domain, or what is it she really wants to do? Publish as a book, or publish as on a database, or what is it? That would inform us as to where she can do that publication properly. Thank you.
All right, Madam, thank you so much. As a matter of fact, the people that I worked for are giving them samples of whatever I collected from them. And of course, I took their consent. I went to them, I took their consent, we signed documents. Whatever, anything that I have to do, I went to see the chief within the community, all of them. But the portions, as you said earlier, we're trying to document or digitalize our indigenous knowledge. I want to know from your side, how do we document them? If it should be part of a pool of knowledge, or how do we document them? As for the people I worked for, I even go to them, I'm giving them samples of the work that I did for them, because one thing they told me is that they want me to bring some portions of the book to the churches within the community so that they will use those ones to teach the younger generation, like during Sunday school services, doing youth programs. So they have copies from me. But aside that, there are other issues academically relating to what I gathered that I think must be published. That is what I wanted to know, if there's any possibility to do that publication.
Yeah, certainly there is. And there are some journals that specialize in these kind of articles, preservation and indigenous knowledge management. So I would suggest that if you go onto Skimago or some of the platforms, you may be able to identify a relevant journal that you can publish in. But I also want to talk, which country are you from? Is it Nigeria or Kenya? I'm not sure.
Please, I'm 100% Ghanaian.
Hey, Ghanaian. Oh,
Yes.
I see. The way you talk, I mix you up with a Nigerian accent. Sorry about that. Okay, so maybe we could talk behind the scenes and see whether we can find a way out for your issue. Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Sraku-Lartey. This question actually is coming from Richard Bruce Lamptey. He would want to know the difference between traditional knowledge and conventional intellectual property. Dr. Prom, or Professor Prom, sorry, can you please take this one for us?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I believe Dr. Sraku-Lartey's indicated some of the main differences here. I mean, with indigenous knowledge, that is, a lot of it is held within the community and is held as a community resource. Specifically, and it may or may not be documented in written form in any place. Whereas conventional intellect, and it isn't registered right as a protected resource with a governmental entity. At least from my understanding, it isn't traditionally done so in the same way that other intellectual property rights might be. That said, of course, there are frameworks for protecting indigenous cultural knowledge through the United Nations and other areas. But conventional intellectual property, of course, is represented in either a patent or copyright, so it's sort of formally registered. And again, I'm a little bit outside my area of expertise here, so I would defer as well to Dr. Sraku-Lartey if she has any additional insights.
All right, thank you, Professor Prom. Dr. Sraku-Lartey, please, would you want to add something more?
Kindly repeat that question again. What was that?
Richard Bruce Lamptey would want to know the differences between traditional knowledge and conventional intellectual property.
No, but traditional knowledge is knowledge that resides in the minds of people, transferred by word of mouth over several generations. It is synonymous with the community. But the point is that if you want to profit off that knowledge, then you need to look at the what do you call it? Intellectual property rights. That's if it's been documented and it's yours. You can't just go and take it and profit off it. So intellectual property, as it comes to books and things like that, that is simple enough. But when it comes to indigenous knowledge, it's a bit complex, and it has to be documented for you to claim proprietary rights over it. If it's in your mind and somebody has heard it without it being documented, he just takes it and profit of it. So it must be documented for it to be intellectually yours, proprietary, and you can actually have an IP over it. So I'm not sure what he really means by his question, but I think that when it comes to conventional books and all the other literature, you know who owns it. But when it comes to intellectual, traditional, indigenous knowledge, who owns it? Is it the community? Is it the individual? Is it the person who got the much profit out of it? Who owns that knowledge? So I think it depends on the circumstances. And it's up to us as information management personnel to get our acts together to ensure that our knowledge stays within the confines of our own institutions in our own country, so that we can advise management at the top level on what to do with that knowledge so that we within the country can benefit from that knowledge. That's what I
Thank you so much, Dr. Sraku-Lartey. There's another question here coming from Godfred Ose Ampoma. Godfred questions go this way. How does community participation influence the preservation of Ghana's cultural heritage? And what measures can strengthen local involvement? Dr. Sraku-Lartey, I think you will be the best person to respond to this.
It looks like it, but you know, even right now, when we did our study, and we did it in several communities, we worked on indigenous knowledge, on forest foods and medicines. We wanted to find out what the local people knew about forest foods, how nutritious they were, and what they could be, how they could be eaten, and all that, and then medicine. It was community engagement. And when we had our focus group discussions with the local people, with the local villages, there were so many people bringing in different ideas. For example, you bring up a particular plant species, and 2 or 3 different people will confirm that, yes, indeed, this particular plant species does what this guy said it does. And therefore, it's community participation. It endorses the when the community comes together. It gives credence to what any individual might have been saying, and because of that, it is easier for us to accept that indeed this might be local knowledge that is being used by the local people, and that gives us cause for us to validate it, either with the desk church or with a third party that will confirm that indeed what these people are saying is true. So community participation does influence the preservation in the sense that it confirms the initial ideas that have been put forward. And as a result of that, it helps those of us trying to document it to put a lot of emphasis on it and emphasize that indeed these are the things that the people are talking about. So what measures can strengthen local involvement? You see, right now, it's going to be very difficult because the very things that we are talking about, you see, a lot of the indigenous knowledge has to do with people who live off off nature. So they know about the plants, they know about the animals, they know about all kinds of things. But those things in our current stage right now, they're under siege. So what we hope to document, by the time we finish documenting, will not even be in existence in Ghana. And therefore, I think that we, at our level as researchers and as librarians, we don't have the capacity to strengthen the local involvement, but we do have the capacity to publish it for the policymakers to know what we do have available. Let me tell you, there's a plant in Ghana, it's called Tabutiela something. It is found only in Ghana. It can't be found anywhere else in the world, only in Ghana. But as I speak, it's almost extinct because nobody has taken it up, cares about it. It is an international NGO that has come into Ghana to make sure that those plants do not go out of extinction. So what does community participation do? Because they do not get any money from it, nobody is prepared to waste, for lack of a better word, waste their time to preserve it. But that alone would even bring in tourism because the ecologists around the world would actually travel to see that plant that can grow only in Ghana. And what is it? Because we do not have enough resources as an institute from our own government to preserve that species. So that's it. Community does help in preservation, but it has to be led by us, the scientists, the librarians, the documentalists, and endorsed by our policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doc, and then Prof. Prom. It has been a very, very insightful set of presentation. I think the questions have not been exhausted. I was just telling Dr. Plucky that I even have many questions myself, but for the sake of time, we may not be able to address all of them now. What I see is that this presentation or this topic or this theme will need more than just this space and time. And that if for nothing at all, many academic libraries and even community libraries and other institutions must take this up. And together with civil society, governments, stakeholders from even the legal area must all come together to work on building policies and strengthening existing legal regimes to be able to help ensure that we retain our indigenous knowledge and indeed benefit not just morally, benefit economically from it. From both presentations, what I get mostly is that acquisition of indigenous knowledge itself is a big recipe for job creation and national economic development. Just look at the benefit of securing the patent rights by India. Pharmaceutical industries will grow, the health sector will benefit, infrastructure also benefits. And I think that the benefits are just numerous, and we cannot discount the role of indigenous knowledge in development, especially in, I would say, developing countries such as ours. So on this note, just for the sake of time, we will have to lower the curtain to this wonderful webinar. And I'm sure that the conversation is not ending today. On this note, I would want to appreciate all of you, but I am not the one to give the vote of thanks. I'll leave the space for my brother Jonathan Seram to give a short closing remarks, and then Dr. Florence Plucky, who has been the pillar for this whole webinar, will be in for the vote of thanks. Thank you all so much. So Jonathan, you are on.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we conclude this enriching session of the 17th ATU Library webinar series, let us reflect on the vital role that researchers from various backgrounds, not forgetting the libraries, archives, and museums, who play roles as custodians of Ghana's cultural soul. In this month of March, when we celebrate our rich heritage, historical legacy, and diverse tradition, today's discussion has reaffirmed that preserving our cultural identity is not just a duty, it is a gift to future generations. From fostering community archives to safeguarding indigenous knowledge, we are weaving a tapestry of resilience and pride. On behalf of Accra Technical Library, the Association of African Universities, and the Ghana Library Association, Ashanti chapter, I thank you all, especially our speakers, Dr. Margaret Sraku and Lartey and Professor Christopher Prom. We really appreciate your the insight you have shared with us. It was very educative and very informative. And also to all participants who took time off their busy schedule to join us. We really appreciate your help, and all other champions of our heritage for your commitment to this noble cause. Let us carry forward this momentum, ensuring that Ghana's story endures, vibrant and unbroken for centuries to come. With that said, thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Let me also take it from there. I also thank everybody, especially Mr. Baden, the Asante Regional Ghana Library Association, Asante Regional Chapter. Mr. Baden, if you are on, please thank you so much and your team for partnering with us. And for University of Illinois, Praise, thank you so much for the things that you are doing to support, preserve our indigenous knowledge, especially the management of University of Illinois and you and all your library team. We are really grateful. Very, very grateful to all of you. And our next webinar, which will be the 18th edition, will come out soon. Please, when you see the call, I humbly urge all of us to join and then let's discuss the insightful discussion. And for this indigenous knowledge, it's just the beginning of the discussion. As librarians, let's show interest to preserve our culture. Let's not stand aloof. Let's just revitalize our knowledge to the benefits of ourselves and our community. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, Nina. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you
Florence.
for the opportunity. We are most
Thank
grateful.
you.
Thank you, Mr. Baden.
Welcome all of you.
Well done.
It was
Mr.
Florence.
Baden, I'm really grateful.
Florence, thank you
Yes,
for murdering my name. Thank you for murdering my name. I'm Folashade Adepoju. Well done.
You owe me, Azifola. You owe me. We talk backstage. Thank you very much.
Prof. Chris, good to see you. Prof. Chris, good to see you. Gladys.
Good to see you.
Thank you.